we are going to check out, or I should say, we are going to learn about Edward Butch O'Hare, the pilot that eliminated 5 planes in 4 minutes. So, this one should be good. Frickin' ace. For a 4-minute ace. So let's fucking go.
I hate it when I start researching for a video and the truth ends up getting in the way of a good story. Luckily, this is a good story regardless. Today we're talking about America's first naval ace of World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Butch O'Hare. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Delete Me.
Finally.
Is that a CMMG descent?
Come find out.
Guys, I gotta go. Well, actually, hold on. What's it chambered in?
It's 300 blackout.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Based.
Sorry about that. Anyways, Delete Me super straight.
And it has now become a tax write-off, chat. He put it on the tax write-off couch. You guys know about that, right? Hang on. This is the tax write-off couch. Yes, I absolutely can. Yes, I can. Yeah, it's basically anything he puts on this couch is a tax write-off because it's a background in his video. And yes, I turned up the volume. Don't worry.
Sorry about that. Anyways, Delete Me is super straightforward. You give them money, they make sure that all your personal information isn't being sold on the internet by data brokers. You see, data brokers are legally required to stop selling your information if you submit an opt-out request. However, submitting an opt-out request is different for every different data broker firm, and they make it as difficult as possible, and Delete Me does all of it for you automatically. Then, after they do delete all your information from data brokers, they continue to monitor all of those data brokers in case your information does get relisted again. They will automatically take it down again. I like Delete Me a lot. It's a service that I actually use. I also just got my wife signed up for it a couple of months ago. As you can see here, they checked for 142 different data brokers and 80 of them had her personal information, and they show us what information that they had. So if you want to give it a try, we'll have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video.
White people.
Now, our story actually begins with his father. So, once upon a time in 1893, Edward Joseph O'Hare, EJ for short, was born in St. Louis, Missouri as a son of 2 first-generation Americans that had just come over from Ireland. He spent his entire childhood in St. Louis, and then in 1912, he would meet his wife Selma. They would end up getting married, and then they would live in an apartment above a grocery store that was owned by Selma's father. Shortly after that, in 1914, Selma would give birth to their first child, Edward O'Hare, that would later come to be known as Butch. Butch would also get 2 little sisters, Marilyn and Patricia, and by all accounts, they had a really happy little family. Okay, fast forward 1923, EJ takes the Missouri State Bar, he passes it, becomes a lawyer, and almost immediately gets this new client by the name of Owen P. Smith, and he is the commissioner of the Greyhound Racing Association for the entire nation. And he needs a lawyer because he needs to patent his new invention, that little electric rabbit that goes around the dog racing track that all the dogs chase. So EJ gets it done for him, and then Owen decides that he wants to keep him around, so he makes him a business partner because he needs a good lawyer that's going to be able to help him keep dog tracks open and open up new dog tracks, because at this point in time, dog tracks received a ton of political resistance. And this is because in 1910, gambling got outlawed, so for the next decade, all the dog tracks were just going out of business, because without the gambling revenue coming in, the business just wasn't financially viable, and I mean, nobody wants to go just watch dogs run in a circle if you're not betting money on it, right? If so facto, all the dog tracks ended up shutting down, except for the ones that were willing to engage in underground illegal gambling, which is why they needed a good lawyer like EJ. But before EJ even passed the bar and became a lawyer in 1923, things were already set into motion that would eventually change that. You see, 1920 was Prohibition when the government banned alcohol. Okay, sidebar. The amount of videos that I have done on this channel and my other channel, The Fat Files, where everything ties back to Prohibition is absolutely insane. It's like that game, you know, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where every single person on the planet knows Kevin Bacon within 6 relationships. I can do any historical event and tie it back to Prohibition somehow, in some way, in some fashion. I know it's possible.
Take a look at this. Jesus Christ.
I mean, just off the top of my head from videos that I've already covered, Prohibition is directly responsible for Domino's not going bankrupt in 2012, every American warship having an ice cream machine on it, that time that America had multiple ships completely dedicated to just making ice cream and distributing it to the Pacific Theater in World War II. The fact that there's 7 billion pounds of cheese in underground caves all over America, the fact that every dairy farmer is required by law to pay into a giant advertising fund so that they can advertise milk, which is where got milk came from. Pretty much all of the IRS codes regarding tax evasion, and now this story as well is also brought to you by Prohibition.
The tax evasion codes stem from Prohibition? I was unaware of that. Shit! And what I was gonna say is, not so much that the Prohibition, how many of the majority of his stories tie into the Great Depression? I would wager that more of his hero stories actually have closer ties to the Great Depression than they do with Prohibition. That's my opinion. Because, like, what, 75-80% of the war hero stories that he has made on his channel? What's the opening? So-and-so grew up in the Great Depression, and thus they had to learn how to do this, and this.
Hard times build strong men.
And women, Tonito, and women. But yes, you are correct.
Prohibition, that one time that the U.S. government tried to ban alcohol and failed miserably. Now, as we all know, after alcohol got...
Grindhouse, the Great Depression was started by the stock market crash, not Prohibition. Prohibition was just kind of a cherry on top.
Banned, organized crime stepped in. They started distributing alcohol. They established speakeasies. They had bootleggers. They manufactured their own booze, and they made a ton of money while they did it. And by 1925, they had gotten so wealthy and so powerful that they were actually able to buy off politicians and law enforcement, and they were able to get away with whatever they wanted. And they were looking for more ways to make even more money, whether it was legal or not. And one of the things they decided that they wanted to do was to get into gambling via dog racing tracks. And now that they had politicians on their payroll, they would actually be able to get the building permits, build all new dog racing tracks, and not be busted for gambling by the law enforcement because they were paying off them too. So you're a big-time mobster that wants to get involved in dog racing, money's not going to be an issue, getting building permits from politicians isn't going to be an issue, and the law enforcement's going to leave you alone. What's the last thing you need? You need somebody that knows how to run a dog racing track and one of those stupid electric rabbit things, right? Right. So that's what they do. The mobsters go and they get a hold of Owen Smith and his legal consigliere, E.J. O'Hare. And when I say mobsters, I just mean the first big-time guy to figure all this out and put the plan together, and that was a gentleman from Chicago by the name of Al Capone.
Al Capone.
Yeah, E.J. and Owen are now partnered with Scarface.
Definitely looks suspicious, and his Southern Italian heritage raises some flags.
Using Capone's connections, they end up building dog tracks in Chicago, Miami, and Boston, and they make a ton of money. And this goes on for years, and EJ ends up earning his new nickname from the mob, Easy Eddie. And back at the O'Hare house, they go from, you know, doing pretty okay financially to being very wealthy very quickly. And despite EJ, Easy Eddie, Dad, being in bed with the mafia and working with Al Capone, when he's back home, by all accounts, he is a terrific father to all three of his kids and a great husband to his wife. But Butch, his son...
Honestly, okay. Honestly, that actually doesn't surprise me. Like, given the mob context. As I recall, during this era, I think a lot of the mobsters, while heinous in their mob activities, were pretty good to their families as far as I'm aware. Like when they were home with their families, they treated they were wonderful with their families. But then when you actually had them doing the mob shit, that's when the monsters came out. So, I mean, I'm glad that he was great with his family. It's honestly not all that surprising, realistically, though.
is the absolute apple of his eye. They have a really special relationship. Using all this new money he has, he goes up, he takes him camping, teaches him how to shoot guns, and then he even gets into flying airplanes, loves taking Butch up into the airplane with him, and sometimes even letting him take control of the plane, and Butch falls in love with both flying and shooting guns. And this goes on for years, being a bad guy for a living and being a good dad back at home. So fast forward 1927, Owen P. Smith ends up passing away. Now, since his business partner just passed away, he acquires the business and the patent to the electric rabbit, and this is where things get a little controversial depending on which source you want to read. Some sources imply that he swindled Owen's widow out of the patent and out of the money, and some other sources say that he basically paid her out. Which, to be fair, both of those are completely possible. He is a crooked lawyer working for the mafia, and also it's pretty standard practice that if you are in a business partnership and your partner passes away, that you buy out his shares and you acquire the entire business. So you can go ahead and pick whichever one you like more for that. Now, it's also at this point in time, right around 1927, that Easy Eddie and his wife Selma come to the realization that their son Butch is adapting a little bit too well to their new life of luxury. I mean, they have enough money to give their kids anything they want. The problem with Butch is all he wants is to sit in the house, read books, and eat donuts 3 times a day. He's 13 years old, he's already starting to get fat and kind of lazy, and one day he reaches peak laziness when he asks his mother at the age of 13, "Hey mom, can I borrow the car to go to the bakery?" The bakery is literally 4 doors down where he buys his donuts. He didn't want to walk like 60 feet to go get a box of donuts so he could eat it. At that point, his parents realized that they had a problem on their hands. So they do what any good parents would do. They come to him.
Wait. This was Gen Z. He was doing Gen Z shit before Gen Z was even a thing. Seriously, that is something you would hear today. And he was doing it, and they were doing it back then? Chat. We are more alike than our ancestors than we realized. Holy crap. I was not in a story about, the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, I was not expecting that to pop up.
Love and compassion, and they hold his hand and they look deeply into his eyes and they tell him it's okay. I'm just fucking kidding. They sent his ass straight to military school.
Are you crazy? No way!
So he gets shipped off to Western Military Academy in Illinois. Fast forward 3 years, 1930. Butch is in his junior year of military school and he absolutely loves it. He's not much for conventional sports like football or wrestling. However, he did end up joining the water polo team, which he really enjoyed, and that's actually how he got his nickname Butch. And he has decided not only does he enjoy military school, but he wants to go on to be in the actual military. He wants to go directly into the U.S. Naval Academy. So that's what Butch is up to. Easy Eddie's still just raking in the dirty gambling money with Al Capone, so much so that in 1930 he buys a massive mansion that has an indoor skating rink and an indoor pool in this really fancy neighborhood in St. Louis. And this is the part where the truth kind of gets in the way of a good story, because when this story is usually told, there hasn't been all this context that I've already given you guys. It's literally just they open up like, hey, there was this lawyer that worked for the mafia and Al Capone. His name was Easy Eddie, and he was the best lawyer around, and he's the reason that Al Capone got kept out of prison, okay? Which, right out of the gate, that's not true, okay? Easy Eddie wasn't Al Capone's lawyer. He happened to be a lawyer that was a business associate of Al Capone, okay? If Al Capone got arrested for a DUI or whatever, it wasn't like he was calling up Easy Eddie to come represent him in court. That never happened. They then go on to explain that him and his son Butch have this amazing relationship, and Butch is the apple of his eye, and he uses the wealth that he's accrued from working with the mafia to give his son everything he could possibly want. And then one day he has a change of heart and realizes that he hasn't given his son a good role model in life to look up to. And at that moment, he decided that he was going to help the IRS put Al Capone in prison, proving to his son how to be a good person, and then the mafia assassinates him for it. And then his son, having seen his father lay down his life to do the right thing, decides that he's going to go off and become a war hero in World War II, and it's this happy story about redemption and doing the right thing, and it's also completely fucking made up and nonsensical. Okay, that story sounds great if Butch is like a 7-year-old little boy. He's not. He's 17, and he's been in military school since he was 13, and he's already about to go into the U.S. Naval Academy, okay? Do you know how fucking mad I would be if my dad, that I had a great relationship with, like one of my best friends that I confided in at the age of 17, and he came to me and was like, son, I've done some pretty bad things in my life, and I've decided to prove to you how to be a good man. I'm going to go ahead and turn myself in and get myself assassinated by the mob just to show you how to do the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, hey, Dad, counter offer, hear me out. What if
Yeah.
you just retired, you're already rich, and then you just stopped doing bad stuff? That would set a pretty good example. I'm
Yes.
also 17, so I don't need you to just like set the example. I'm old enough and mature enough to understand the concept of like, hey, do as I say, not as I do, you know? Maybe don't go get yourself killed basically for no reason.
This city wept. We lost 2 heroes who
Wasn't even an awning in their direction.
No, I know.
Jumped 20 stories.
Doesn't make sense, does it?
So again, that's complete nonsense, fairy tale land. Not only is it not historically supported, it also doesn't even make sense if you understand people even a little bit. Okay, so here's what actually happened. In 1930, Easy Eddie does start working with the IRS because he's running all the dog tracks.
And
He's helping
thank you,
Al
random
Capone
me
cook the
man.
books and basically launder all the money. And he's going to be able to show the IRS how he's doing it, which is going to be able to allow them to put Al Capone in prison for tax evasion. Now, from here, there's another myth that honestly I also don't buy, but basically they insinuate that Easy Eddie actually helped the feds put away Al Capone in exchange for guaranteeing that his son, Butch O'Hare, got into the U.S. Naval Academy. Okay, and again, I don't know where
I
this
don't
myth
buy
came
that.
from. I don't know why people believe this. There's almost no historical evidence that supports it, and if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense, okay?
No, how the hell could a state's attorney guarantee that someone gets into the military? This is a state. This is sorry, not state's attorney, but it's the federal attorney has no fucking connection to the U.S. military. There's absolutely nothing that they could do to get him into the military. So it absolutely, this sounds like someone that, whoever concocted this, sounds like they got a little bit of the history, and his dad was a lawyer that was somehow associated with the mob and wanted to turn state's evidence. His son either wanted to go in the military or they knew he eventually would be in the military, and they concocted the story to basically like weave these through lines connecting one to the other. And they said, well, his son was gonna go in the military, or he was in the military. His dad was gonna be turning state's evidence. So the logical course of action in my twisted little brain is that the dad said, as long as my son can get in the military, I will turn state's evidence for you. Not realizing that their logic is completely fucked. That is my guess where that story comes from. Logic was on lunch when they came up with this theory, I think. Hey, Kaibo, my brain is not twisted. It's ripply, but it's not twisted.
The U.S. Naval Academy has like a 10 to 12% acceptance rate, and Butch O'Hare just spent the last 5 years in one of the most prestigious military academies in the United States, and he performed well there. He's pretty much guaranteed a slot at the U.S. Naval Academy at this point. And we know how he performed once he got into the U.S. Naval Academy, and there was nothing that even remotely suggested that he didn't belong there. So
Also
if he
true,
was going to
Atanashi,
get in anyways,
It's very true, Atanashi. It takes away from Butch's merit, but my guess is the story that's been concocted about how Butch got in wasn't focused so much on Butch's accomplishment in the military. The stories that were created were probably the focus was more on the father. And the whole thing about Butch getting into the military was just like a tertiary thing that they were unconcerned about, and their storytelling focus was on the father. That's my suspicion. So it's just, they didn't care about his military career. They just cared about the dad being associated with the mob and, turning Al Capone in, and that's where their focus for whatever story or research they were doing was fixated upon.
why on earth would Easy Eddie go get Al Capone turned in and get himself killed for no reason? So what do I think happened? I think that it was 1930 and Elliot Ness and his crew of uncorruptible cops known as the Untouchables were going around putting all the mobsters in jail, and Al Capone was number one on their list, and Easy Eddie, being the intelligent guy that he was, realized that if they got Al Capone and then they would just start working their way down the ladder and they would eventually get to him too. So he figured, hey, maybe I should help them get Al Capone and then I'll get my own freedom instead. Now, in addition to this, to be
Okay, I don't know if Nick is going to talk about this, but Elliot Ness was not the massive part of bringing down Al Capone that movies like The Untouchables and the TV series The Untouchables made it out to be. Elliot Ness was actually a very tiny part. Like, the whole way that Al Capone was taken down was a conglomeration of law enforcement. And Elliot Ness was at... I'm trying to remember because I read about this a while ago. He was a very small part of bringing Capone down. But I think he made himself seem like he was bigger more involved in the entire process than he actually was. This was there were a large amount of law enforcement personnel were involved in this. It was not just Elliot Ness and his 3 untouchables that were doing the work. No, that is incorrect. He was I don't even know if, Sean Connery and Andy Garcia's characters and the third guy, the accountant guy, I don't even know if they were actual real people or if they were just characters from the movie. But Elliot Ness was a real person, but he was a very small part in bringing down Capone. And he really didn't do a whole hell of a lot. This was the efforts of a great many different law enforcement agencies and individuals that, yes, they eventually did they couldn't get him on criminal acts, criminal mob acts. So that's when they turned to the tax code and they basically got him for tax evasion. So yes, that is how they did end up getting him for tax evasion. That is how they finally got him in prison, because they could never get him in on any of his mob stuff. So because he fucked up with his taxes, that's how they got him. But Elliot Ness was not this big hero that basically charged in and ran the investigation and was responsible for bringing him down. No. He was a tiny part of it. Out of, I don't even know how many law enforcement individuals and agencies were involved, but it was not an insubstantial amount. He just, if I'm remembering the piece that I read about this, he tried to make himself seem more important and in the investigation that he was, but he was not at all an important part of it.
Be fair to the myth that I did just try to debunk, it would not surprise me if there was some portion of this conversation where Easy Eddie was like, hey, I'm willing to be your guys' informant. My son is applying for the U.S. Naval Academy. If for some reason that it gets brought up that his dad is a famous mafia guy that works for Al Capone, and that is going to prevent him from getting in for that reason alone, I need you guys to tell them that I don't actually work for the mafia anymore and I'm working for you as an informant. That way my son gets what he deserves. Okay, that is a very, very big difference between he got his son in by turning in Al Capone and he got out of his son's way, while also saving his own skin, which was probably his primary goal to begin with. Regardless, Al Capone gets arrested and put in jail for tax evasion in 1931. Then in 1932, Butch sets off for the U.S. Naval Academy. While attending the academy, Butch does a great job and goes back home every chance he gets to hang out with his mom, his dad, and his 2 sisters. Now, right around this time, Easy Eddie and Selma end up getting a divorce, and Easy Eddie actually moves to Chicago so he can be closer to the racetrack that he's running. Okay, fast forward 1937, Butch graduates from the Naval Academy and he decides that he wants to go off to become a pilot. Here's the problem. You can't just go off to become a pilot right after becoming a commissioned officer after graduating from the academy. You have to serve a minimum of 2 years in the Naval Surface Fleet, so he sets off to do that, serving his 2 years on the battleship, the USS New Mexico. So he does that for the next 2 years while dad is back home running the dog tracks in Chicago. Then 1939 rolls around. He's done his 2 years worth of time in the Surface Fleet. He applies to get into Naval Aviation School and he gets accepted. And right as he is about to ship off to go become a pilot, he receives word that his father has been murdered on November 8th, 1939. Easy Eddie had just left his office at the dog track in Chicago and was driving home. And when he pulled up to a stoplight, 2 armed gunmen got out with 12-gauge shotguns and opened fire on him inside of his car. Eddie tried to escape, but he was shot multiple times and ended up veering off and crashing into a light pole, and he would pass away almost immediately from his wounds. Now, technically, we don't actually know who killed Eddie. This is considered a cold case, this. However, pretty much everybody agrees that it was a mafia because he was assassinated approximately 1 week before Al Capone was set to get out of prison from the tax evasion charges that Eddie helped with in the first place. So everybody just kind of assumed that this was Al Capone's gift for getting out of prison. Now, going back to my original anger with the oversimplified version of this story from blogs and newspapers and magazines and other YouTube videos, when they tell the story, it's like Easy Eddie helps turn in Al Capone and then he is assassinated for it. They fail to mention that he's assassinated like 9 years later, okay, which I feel is kind of an important detail. Okay, setting that aside, Butch takes emergency leave, he comes back home, he buries his father, and this is obviously extremely hard to do because that's his dad that died, but to make it even worse, the newspaper and the media is dragging his father and by extension his entire family completely through the mud. You gotta remember, this is the 1930s, the anti-mafia sentiment is at an all-time high, and because of this, the newspapers and the law enforcement hype anything up they possibly can to make the American public feel safer. They want them to feel like the war against organized crime is being won, and in this case, they hyped up Eddie to be something a lot more than he was. This is where the myth that Easy Eddie was the mastermind, criminal, genius lawyer that kept the entire mafia out of prison came from. That's how the media portrayed him after his death. And did Easy Eddie do some bad stuff? Yeah, absolutely.
Again, showcasing how journalists can't be trusted even back in the 1930s, going into the 1940s, that they will jump on the bandwagon of whatever's popular so they can sell copy. Fucking journalists.
Came from. That's how the media portrayed him after his death. And did Easy Eddie do some bad stuff? Yeah, absolutely. He enabled the mafia to make money from illegal gambling at dog racing tracks, and he made a bunch of money in the process as well. However, at no point was he the evil mastermind that was keeping Al Capone and all the mobsters out of jail. And having the newspapers vilify him to that degree was devastating to Butch and his family. I mean, yeah, he did some bad things, but he was a great dad to them, and from their perspective, he probably did those bad things to provide for his family. Whether that's right or wrong is a different conversation, but to them, he was still their hero. He was a great guy in their eyes. Not only did they have to deal with the emotional and mental stress of that, but they were also starting to get treated different by their community because now the entire community was looking down on them because Easy Eddie was apparently this evil criminal mastermind, and all the money they have and all the fancy cars and the big house was clearly blood money, and now nobody liked the family either. At this point in time, it would have
because the fucking journalists lied. Are we seeing, again, side tangent. This is what piss poor sensationalized journalism does. By eschewing the facts, like, okay, yes, like, and Nick did preface that, like, yes, he was doing illegal stuff with the dog track, but the journalists were painting him as some kind of fucking mastermind and a literal mob lawyer, and they were elevating him to a status and level that he was not at. Like, if they had just said he was an illegal dog track owner, that's one thing. But they went so much further with it and turned him into this grand villain that he never was. And what happened when they do this? When they sensationalize the fuck out of it just so they could sell copy? They fucking destroy his family. Because journalists, no matter how much they profess that they care about if like somebody gets hurt, they don't give a fuck. The only thing journalists give a fuck about is selling copy or getting a sensational story to get a bunch of eyeballs on them so they can get better assignments, or they can go up the chain and maybe become an editor or something. They don't fucking care about who they trample or steamroll along the way. And this is how people's lives get fucking destroyed. And we're seeing it to this day. I'm not blanket painting every journalist that does this job. I am not doing that. There are journalists out there that are hardworking. They dig for the facts. They are not smearing people. They are doing their job because they want to get the news out. They want to inform people of things that are happening, and their goal is not to railroad or steamroll anybody in service to the story. But way too fucking many do not care about railroading someone with incorrect statements or improper facts or flat up fucking lies, and that is happening all the way up through today. It's even more prevalent today. Okay, this was not as present back in the 1930s and 1940s, and even for a couple decades after that. It was not prevalent, but it absolutely was there. Today, it's all it is. So we've seen the evolution because sensationalism sells copy. And that has just grown and evolved and mutated into this unholy monstrosity that we see today, where you literally cannot read a news article and trust it to be factual. Anyway, side tangent. That just pissed me off when I heard how these journalists destroyed his family for no fucking good reason other than to make good copy, and I had to just make the rant. So, moving on.
It appeared that the last name O'Hare was forever going to be associated with the mafia and looked down upon forever. Now, I don't know this for sure because Butch never wrote about it, so I can't truly know his intentions. However, putting myself in his situation, I have to assume that he felt like his dad was in fact a good guy that was driven to do bad things for the right reason. Being in Butch's shoes, that's his dad, it was his best friend, it was his hero. Realizing that his dad had done horrible things to put Butch in the advantageous position that he was in now, having gone through military school, having graduated the U.S. Naval Academy, and now being headed off to flight school, Butch couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. His dad had become a villain so that Butch had the opportunity to become a hero.
And so it gassed him up. He's not letting it stop him. If anything, this just fucking gassed him up to become the best fucking pilot that he could. And those journalists, in trying to destroy his father's name, just fucking created a legendary monster in the air. Yeah, it was. It needs to be replayed.
To flight school, Butch couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. His dad had become a villain so that Butch had the opportunity to become a hero. So Butch does the only thing he can do. He goes back out to flight school. While there, he does okay in the classroom. He's not the best at taking written tests, but when it comes to actually getting Butch inside the planes, he is exceptional. He is one of the best pilots they've ever seen, and he's even better at gunnery. This guy can put rounds on target with his eyes closed. He graduates from flight school in May of 1940. Then he gets stationed on the USS Saratoga, an aircraft carrier with VF-3. Okay, now at this point, we got to remember it's early 1940. World War II has officially started, but America is not directly involved yet. That being said, pretty much everybody in the military is aware that America is going to be involved soon, and they are training extra hard to get ready for that, as well as training as many new recruits as possible. So all of America's best warfighters at this point in time are pretty much sent in to go train as many new guys as possible, and the man in charge of VF-3 to get all these new guys trained up and ready for war is a legendary pilot by the name of John Thatch. And this man is a complete badass. He is basically Maverick from Top Gun, except in the 1930s and 40s. This guy was training all the new guys that came through VF-3, and it was his standard practice to take the best, cockiest new pilots they had, and he would take them up in the air in F-4F Wildcats and have a mock dogfight with them, and he would allow the cocky new guy to get the advantageous position on him just to shake them off, get behind them, and shoot them down first, just to show them how good they're not. Just the complete dad energy. If we're going to set a tone right now out of the gate, you're not that good, you're going to shut up, you're going to listen to what I have to tell you, because it's the best chance you have at making it through this war that we have coming up. The dude is out there right now just breaking egos for a living, until one day there's a new pilot that shows up. He's not particularly cocky, but he's highly regarded as one of the best they have, and Thatch wants to take him up in the air just to see what he has, and he does what he always does. He lets them get the advantageous position, except this young pilot by the name of Butch O'Hare is so good that Thatch can't shake him. Now, Thatch is a better pilot overall, but O'Hare is so close in talent to Thatch that if Thatch does give up the tactical advantage, he's not able to recover. After seeing how incredibly talented Butch is, Thatch decides to take him under his wing and becomes his mentor. So they train a ton. It's that Yoda...
I'm gonna be honest. I thought that the story was gonna end, that Thatch was gonna be able to shake him off, get behind him, and basically get the quote-unquote kill. But that Butch's skill would have been substantial and would result in him taking Butch under his wing. I actually did not expect Butch to be able to keep Thatch on the defensive like that. That's fucking impressive that he was able to do it. And by the way, Kanito, yes, I did. Yes, I did. I didn't say anything, but yes, he was from Chicago, and his last name is O'Hare. Oh, I caught that. I absolutely did. Don't you worry.
Thatch decides to take him under his wing and becomes his mentor. So they train a ton. It's that Yoda and Luke, the Mickey and Rocky type relationship. And one of the things that they start doing is they start trying to address the issues that they know they're going to run into once the war starts. And the big issue right off the bat is Japan's new fighter plane, the Mitsubishi Zero, that came out in 1940. It is faster and more maneuverable than the Grumman F-4F Wildcats by a long shot. Okay, this means not only does the Zero have the edge in combat, it also means that the F-4F Wildcats can't really run away because the Zeros will just chase him down and shoot him out of the sky. So Thatch, being the tactical genius that he is, realizes the only chance they're going to have is to fight. This situation is kind of like when he first met Butch and took him up into the sky. Thatch is a better pilot than Butch. However, if he was able to give up that small advantage, he wasn't able to recover. He needs to find whatever that small advantage is that the F-4F Wildcat has over the Zero so that he can enable his men to win. And what he comes up with is a tactic that would later come to be known as the Thatch Weave. It's basically a counterpunch.
Wait. Hang on. Hang on. Let me get out of the way. See, actually, I think we should probably hang out over here because I have a feeling all of his stuff is going to be on that side. So we're gonna hang out over here, I think, for the rest of the video.
And what he comes up with is a tactic that would later come to be known as the Thatch Weave. It's basically a counterpunch because he knows the Zeros are going to end up behind the Wildcats. They're faster, they're more maneuverable. Once a Wildcat has a Zero on its tail, another Wildcat's going to pull up next to it, and then they're going to cross paths, and then they're going to cross paths a second time, kind of like a zipper. And right as they're about to cross paths the second time, the wingman is directly lined up with the broadside of the enemy Zero, and he's going to be able to open fire without running the risk of shooting down his friend. So it looks good on paper, but obviously he's got to see if it works in real life, so he calls upon his protege, young Butch O'Hare, to go up with a bunch of other planes to be the bad guys and try to chase down him and his guys where he can test the tactic. And it works out great. Butch was not able to shoot down any of them. The Thatch Weave would then be proven combat effective at the Battle of Midway, and it is still considered a viable dogfighting tactic to this day. During all this training, Butch would actually get some time off. He goes out, meets a young woman by the name of Rita, and on their very first date, he asked her to marry him, and she says yes, because Butch O'Hare doesn't miss. They then go, they have a honeymoon in Hawaii, they come back, and they start living together in Coronado, California, while VF-3 is stationed at North Island Naval Center. And while he lived there, everything went great. He was training a ton, he was busy, but he did get to go home to his new wife every single night. And then one day, Thatch decided to make everybody in VF-3 come in for extra training on what appeared to be a random Sunday in December of 1941. And they did their training in the morning.
No.
Thatch cut everybody loose for lunch, and they were supposed to report back to finish training that night. And as Butch O'Hare was driving to his apartment to meet up with his wife for lunch, over the radio, he would find out that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. He gets home, he tells his wife, and I quote, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm to board the Saratoga as soon as possible. It's war." The very next day, the USS Saratoga and VF-3 set off from North Island to go participate in World War II. On their way there, the world would find out about Wake Island, where 450 Marines and 1,200 civilian construction workers fought off the Japanese on a small coral atoll that the Japanese wanted to use as a forward operational base. In the initial defense of Wake Island, the Marines and the construction workers were able to sink 2 enemy destroyers and a submarine, repelling their entire force. And this is looked at as America's first victory over Japan, and it was a silver lining that the entire country looked to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Because of this, America would immediately send ships to reinforce Wake Island. However, the ships that were leaving Pearl Harbor had a humongous head start. Amongst the American ships making their way there was Butch O'Hare and the USS Saratoga, as well as the rest of VF-3. Unfortunately, the American leadership would come to the realization that they were not going to be able to beat the Japanese there, and they didn't want to risk losing any more ships than they already had in Pearl Harbor, and they were ordered to back off and not try to save the Marines and the construction workers at Wake Island. After 2 weeks of fighting, fighting, the Marines and the construction workers were forced to surrender. Those that did not die in combat were either executed or held as POWs for the remainder of World War II. Because of how brutally the Japanese treated the civilian construction workers, the American government realized that they couldn't rely on civilian contractors to do all their construction on forward operational bases in the future. And this is where the Navy's construction battalion was originally founded, aka the Seabees.
The
And those
Seabees.
civilian construction workers that were at Wake Island are considered to be America's first honorary Seabees. During this same time, the USS Saratoga would be crippled by an enemy torpedo, and VF-3 would have to rotate and now be stationed on the USS Lexington. Once there, it is the Lexington's mission to penetrate deep into enemy territory so they can attack the port at Rabaul. They get like 450 miles away, and all of a sudden, a Japanese recon plane spots them. So they send some fighters up. Thatch himself shoots down this enemy recon plane. But he didn't get to him fast enough because they got that radio transmission out, and the Japanese bombers are already on the way to hit the USS Lexington. They start getting fighters up in the air as fast as they can as 9 Japanese G4M Betty bombers show up, and some of the fighters are already starting to engage the bombers, shooting them down. And Butch O'Hare is the last man slotted to get up in the air. He's sitting there on the flight deck in his Wildcat, fully fueled up, as the bombers are coming in, getting attacked by the other Wildcats, and he's just waiting his turn to get up in the air, hoping that the bombers don't make it and bomb the USS Lexington with him right on top of it in a fully fueled up aircraft. By the time Butch gets up in the air, the combat's basically over. The bombers have been repelled, and most of the Wildcats are still chasing them down, and they end up shooting down all of them. And then a second wave of bombers gets detected on radar, and this is a humongous problem. You see, all the Wildcats are up in the air, and most of them have been in the air so long that they're out of ammo and fuel, and once those planes return from chasing down that first wave, they're going to have to land. They're not going to be able to fight. By the time that second wave gets close, the only planes available with fuel and ammunition able to fight are Butch O'Hare and the guy that went up right before him, Duff DeFillo. So what do? They do the only thing they can do. Butch and Duff get next to each other, and they are about to engage 9 Japanese bombers in a double V formation, and Butch fires his guns just to make sure they're all working, standard procedure. Duff goes to fire his. All of them are jammed. So Duff's out. It is now Butch O'Hare versus an entire formation of Japanese bombers all by himself. He's already running low on fuel, and he only has enough ammunition for 10 3-second bursts with his guns. He does not have enough ammunition to take down all of these planes, and even if he did, he doesn't have the time to do it all by himself. He needs to be as accurate as humanly possible, and that's exactly what he does. Using his expertise in gunnery, he is engaging engines and fuel tanks, and that is it. On his first pass, he manages to knock 2 bombers out of the formation. He then immediately goes into a second pass, engaging the first bomber he sees on the other side of the formation, critically damaging it as well, forcing it to drop its bombs early and peel away. He then engages the next bomber next to it, striking the fuel tank.
Gotcha, bitch.
Causing it to blow up in midair. He immediately goes into his third pass, shooting down another 2 bombers before making his 4th pass, engaging another one. And while this is happening, the crew of the USS Lexington is just watching in awe as it unfolds before them. The admiral on board said, and I quote, "All of us on the flight deck and the bridges became so intent watching the aerial battle that it was hard for us to concentrate on our duties. At the time, the entire ship's company burst into cheers as our fighter shot the bombers down into the sea. It was not as though they were in the midst of a life or death struggle, but at a baseball game." After his 4th pass, Butch was completely out of ammunition and almost out of fuel. The 4 remaining Japanese planes dropped their bombs, and all of them missed.
Yes!
All right! That wasn't so hard.
In the span of 4 minutes, Butch O'Hare had pulled off the impossible, going toe-to-toe with an entire Japanese bombing formation, and during that time, he was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. The entire bombing formation, returning fire on Butch, managed to hit him with a total of 1 bullet. Butch was engaging the enemy so quickly from so many different angles that one of the surviving Japanese pilots said, and I quote, "Enemy planes swirled around us, zooming, banking, diving, attacking us from all directions."
Oh, fuck. He was that goddamn good that they thought they were getting attacked by a full fucking squadron instead of one guy. One fucking guy. Holy crap. Yeah, chat, I'm pretty sure Butch spec'd into the Deadeye perk on this one. He's spec'd into Deadeye and Speed Force perks. He was moving in, he was flying in and hitting so fucking hard, they thought they were getting hit by a full fucking squadron instead of one guy. This is not plot armor. This is not plot armor. This is fucking plot scope. Okay, plot armor would be if they were shooting at him and he was basically just like, tanking it or dodging it. He's zipping in there and like perfect pinpoint fucking accuracy. This whole through the entire engagement. That's God scoping. Okay, he was basically 360 no-scoping a full squadron of bombers, okay? That's what this man was doing. Literally 360 no-scoping. And did it. Fuck yes.
Actions, not realizing that it was one man.
Maybe
One man.
So the 4 remaining Japanese planes that dropped their bombs and missed, they peel off, they retreat. Butch goes to land, and as he goes to land, he drops his landing gear, and some new guy on the deck opens fire on him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Luckily, it was all misses. Butch gets out of his Wildcat, walks up to the guy that was just shooting at him. It's some new kid that is now just shitting his pants because he almost just killed the hero of the day. And Butch walks up completely cool, and he's like, son, I don't mind if you shoot at me. Just try not to do it with my landing gears down. Which is probably the politest way of calling this kid an idiot to his face imaginable, considering that he just shot at him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Like, hey kid, if a plane has its landing gear down and you're on an aircraft carrier, it's probably trying to land on you, meaning it's not an enemy. Why would you shoot at me? Okay, now that the immediate threat is over, this has been like 30 minutes of straight chaos. We've got to figure out what all happened, where everybody's at, if they're okay. We have to get the planes ready in case there is another attack. There's a lot of stuff to do. So Butch, all the other pilots, and pretty much everybody else that would have seen anything goes in to get debriefed so the chain of command can try to figure out what all happened in this very busy couple of minutes. So Butch goes in and says, I shot up 7 of those planes really good. I'm pretty sure I downed 6 of them. To which the captain of the USS Lexington is like, actually, I'm going to go ahead and only credit you with 5 because after you pulled off after your last run, there was still 4 bombers in the air that dropped their bombs, and there was originally 9 to begin with. I do think that you shot down the other 5 though, because, well, pretty much everybody saw it happen. So now Butch has officially been credited with downing 5 enemy planes. This makes him an ace pilot and the first naval aviator ace of World War II. And at first, Butch doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't regard himself as being special. He doesn't think what he did was incredible. He thought he did exactly what anyone else in VF3 would have done if they were in the exact same situation. As far as
And again, as much as I say this all the time, are we seeing a fucking pattern here? Every fucking one of these war heroes in World War I and World War II, they don't think of themselves as heroes. When they do these incredible things, they don't do it in the name of heroism. They do it because it's their job to do it. It's the right thing to do, and they're doing it in the defense of others. It's a job that they need to do, and they are intent upon doing it because it needs to be done. And that's fucking it. Every single one of these heroes that we here talk about, from World War I, World War II, even up into Vietnam, they do the job. They do this because it must be done, and they know they are the ones that can do it. They don't care about the fame. They don't care about the accolades. They just want to make sure they can get their people through it and out the other side in one piece. And this is what makes these men heroes. This is why people of today need to know about these heroes so they have true heroism that they can aspire to be. We don't have a lot of that in this day and age, or if we do, it's very shallow. These men from this age are true heroes. And they need to be remembered because they are the ones that will truly inspire the heroes of the next generations.
far as Butch O'Hare is concerned, the only thing about that day that was unique to him was that he happened to be in the right place at the right time. He wasn't necessarily the right guy. And then he came out of getting debriefed, and the crew of the USS Lexington had already went down to the machine shop and made him a trophy. He was everybody's best friend. He was the hero of the day that had saved the USS Lexington, and everybody was in love with Butch O'Hare, America's first ace. The crew of the USS Lexington and the rest of VF3 actually adopted a new drinking song that night as well. It goes something along the lines of, "O'Hare, O'Hare, did the Japanese bombers go? O'Hare, O'Hare, could they be?" Okay, now sidebar, in the spirit of full disclosure, retroactively after World War II, it has been decided that Butch O'Hare actually only shot down 3 enemy bombers on that day. Apparently this is because the Japanese documented that actually only 3 planes were shot down during that wave. 3 of them returned back severely shot up, and one of them apparently got lost in a storm.
You sure about that?
Okay, and this is where I get annoyed, because on one hand, like, yeah, okay, I understand wanting to figure out the truth and clarify things, but also I feel like Americans typically tend to believe what the enemy says happened more than they believe the word of their own men. I mean, when the captain of the USS Lexington looks up in the sky and he's like, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 left, the rest were shot down. I don't know why we're not believing that guy. Why are we believing the Japanese documentation over that? And don't get me wrong, I understand that people make mistakes, and maybe the captain miscounted. Maybe the entire crew that was also watching had a bad account of what happened, you know? Because the enemy never ever makes mistakes, just like the enemy that was under—
You fucking lies. Wait, the Japanese have spent a great deal of time and effort post-World War II going about doing revisionist history. Nick has talked about this many times. Maybe not many times, but Nick has talked about this on the Unsub podcast, that at the conclusion of World War II and in the days and years and decades that followed, that there are history revisionists whose specific job is to try and downplay or outright lie about the events that occurred during World War II with the Japanese. So you don't think the fucking Japanese would lie about how many planes he shot down to try and discredit Butch O'Hare so they could try and fucking take away his ace? Huh? Because remember that they're talking about, like, this came about later. After the war, years after the war, Nick was saying that they revised it because they revised it years after World War II had concluded. They revised the numbers because the Japanese said, "Oh, this." So bullshit.
Under the impression that he was getting attacked by multiple planes all at once and they were everywhere all over the place, when in reality it was just Butch up there by himself. Okay, and I know this is crazy and I'm definitely biased, but I'm always going to be more inclined to believe the guys on my team than the enemy. But hey, whatever, I'm not the expert, that's one thing, whatever. Maybe everybody on the USS Lexington miscounted and the Japanese counted right. I guess that is possible. However, I will argue till I die that the Japanese pilot that got shot up by Butch O'Hare and then magically got lost in a storm that none of the other shot up planes managed to get lost in, absolutely got shot down by Butch O'Hare, okay? I don't care if the storm did the last 5% of the damage. Butch should get credit for that, okay? It's complete lunacy to say anything other than that. I mean, for real, apply this logic to any other situation. Imagine that you're at a party and there's an altercation that breaks out between guy A and guy B, and guy A pulls out a gun, shoots guy B in the chest 17 times, and then guy B falls into the pool, okay? Are we gonna be like, oh, that guy drowned? No, guy A killed guy B, okay? That's obvious. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I get super annoyed when there's some people that have nothing better to do with their lives and look back and retroactively nitpick and try to undermine the accomplishments of others. Honestly, Butch O'Hare probably wouldn't even care this much because all he cared about was saving his dudes. But also, he's a better man than I am, so whatever, moving on. Anyways, so over the next couple of days, things kind of return to normal-ish. However, the USS Lexington is still on mission. They're still making their way to Rabaul so they can attack this port. And then once they get there, they start launching raids. Now, Butch is pumped. He wants to get back up in the air. He wants more combat. That's what he's here for, right? However, it gets decided by Thatch that Butch and Duff are to stay at the USS Lexington while everybody else goes out and conducts raids. And the theory behind that was, or at least the stated theory as to what Thatch told O'Hare was, hey, we're leaving you guys to defend it because we know if everything goes bad, you two by yourselves can defend the USS Lexington against anything. That's what Thatch told him. In reality, Thatch knew that Butch O'Hare was being put up for the Medal of Honor, and so did the rest of the chain of command, and they knew that they could not afford to let Butch get killed in combat. Okay, this is early 1942.
Okay.
This is 2 months after Pearl Harbor. The only silver lining, the only good news that America has gotten in the past 90 days was about the Marines and the construction workers making their last stand at Wake Island, and now they've all been captured, either killed or put in internment camps. Okay, America has not had any good news, except now they have the story of Butch O'Hare, the man that became an ace in 4 minutes. Shortly after
Yeah, and it's like I get it. I like Butch would not, but we understand. We are able to look at it on a macro level. Butch was not able to do that. Butch in his situation, we had to look at it on he was looking at it on a micro level because he didn't have access to the macro data. So yeah, I get it. I'm guessing you guys get it. Yeah. It makes sense. It's, the same reason why why the military would pull their heroes out of the war and ship them back stateside so they can train the new breed and so they can sell war bonds, because as harsh and perhaps heartless as this may sound, in the context of World War II, a hero was only as good as his ability to continue breathing. Once a hero has been established as a hero, they become more valuable to the country by going stateside, training the new breed of recruits, and selling war bonds to keep the war machine flowing. And on a macro level, that makes sense. But I also completely understand the micro level of, you have this outstanding fucking warfighter. This is what he does. This is what he wants to do. Let him do his job, because it's better to have a highly skilled warfighter on the front lines doing what they do, doing work, than sticking them in the rear so they can basically be a mouthpiece and a shiny object for people to go, ooh, buy war bonds. Like, I can see and understand the logic in both sides of it. My gut tells me, keep them on the front fucking lines. They're good at what they do. Let them keep doing what they do. Let them go to work. That is what my gut says, while I'm still recognizing the logic behind the other side of it. It's a situation where there's no good answer. That there realistically, there's no good way to approach this. That is sort of a catch-all. Each side has its merits, basically. It's, you kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, exactly, Ardog. That's what I'm saying. I understand and appreciate the logic behind get them stateside, get them out of combat, because if the hero dies, it does give morale a big hit. So I'm fully cognizant, fully aware, and fully appreciate the legitimate logic behind that. Well, I can also fully appreciate that the warfighter themselves feel like, this is what I do and I'm good at it, let me do my job.
After this, Butch is informed that he's going to be receiving the Medal of Honor, to which he directly tells Thatch, I don't want it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to have to go back stateside. He wants to stay out there with his men.
We go.
He still does not feel as though he did anything special. And the man that has been his father figure, his mentor for the past couple of years, basically pats Butch on the shoulder and informs him, too bad. Deal with it. You're a hero now. Now you got to go do that, because that's ultimately what's going to be the best for this war effort. And with that, Butch is sent back home
Yep.
stateside, where there is both a
Exactly.
literal parade for him when he arrives, and he is then metaphorically paraded around the country, conducting interviews, doing anything he can to boost the morale of the American people and the military in the wake of Pearl Harbor. During this metaphorical parade, he makes his way to the White House, where he is awarded the Medal of Honor by FDR, and his very own wife, Rita, is the one that gets to put it around his neck. And all of this is because he was just some fat kid from St. Louis that wanted some donuts, but also didn't want to walk very far to get them. And honestly, he's still that fat kid at heart. He's never been the star athlete. He's never had everybody looking at him. He's never stood in the spotlight for this long. And during this time, he is described as modest, humorous, inarticulate, very nice, and more than a little embarrassed by the entire affair. So he gets paraded around the country helping to sell war bonds until about June of 1942. Then VF-3 is actually set to come back to Hawaii for some R&R. And while there, VF-3's commander, John Thatch, is set to get a promotion and move on and advance his naval career. And he is going to be replaced by none other than his protege and war hero, Butch O'Hare. On June 19th, 1942, Butch O'Hare formally relieves John Thatch of command of VF-3 as he assumes command himself. John Thatch would then go on to say, and I quote, "I know of no one I would rather see take my old command into new battles." Of course, referring to Butch O'Hare, and this meant more to Butch than winning the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Butch was going to get to go back into combat. VF-3 had actually been taken, and they are now going to be training all of the new pilots to get ready for war, because America's practice at this point in time was to save all of our best pilots and make them teachers to train the next generation, as opposed to the Japanese who, well, they used up all their good pilots.
They all died.
So Butch and the remaining combat veterans of VF-3 start training a bunch of new guys, and Butch officially becomes known as the King of Maui. Because, I mean, he's the war hero. Everybody knows his name. He's training all the new guys. He's in charge. This guy is clearly the main character. And this is an important time because he's training the next generation of fighter pilots that he'll eventually take into combat, but he also gets to go home every night and spend time with his wife. And during this period, they end up having their daughter, Kathleen, that he gets to meet in March of 1943. With Butch leading all the training, VF-3 became known as Butch's Boys, and a lot of these pilots went on to become aces themselves, and they all had incredible things to say about Butch and the lessons that he was able to pass on to them. Then in August of 1943, VF-3 was reinstated as VF-6, and they were being stationed on the USS Independence, and they were being sent back into the Pacific Theater for combat. But unlike last time, Butch isn't going to have a plane that's outmatched by Japanese Zeros, because him and his men are not getting Wildcats. They're getting the new Grumman F-6F Hellcat. And I cannot stress to you enough what a big difference this is. The Wildcat is outmatched by Japanese planes. The Hellcat, on the other hand, will go on throughout the rest of World War II to rack up a 19-to-1 kill ratio. And now Butch and his boys got the new Hellcats, and they proceed to go and fuck shit up. First thing they do is they go and they launch raids on Wake Island and Marcus Island. Butch lands a couple of more air-to-air kills, solidifying his status as an ace, even if people like to go back in time and try to discredit some of his kills. Then VF-6, now VF-3, gets restationed onto the USS Enterprise, and Butch, the war hero, gets put in charge of all 3 squadrons on the USS Enterprise. Okay, here's the problem with that. Butch is now officially a bigwig. He's not supposed to be out there in a Hellcat mixing it up with the enemy anymore. He's supposed to be going up in like a Grumman Avenger, you know, a command plane, so he can see everything, see what's going on, be protected, be safe.
But
be
he
the
don't
smart
like
guy
that.
up in the tower telling the troops on the ground what to do. Okay, but that's not how Butch gets down, okay? He officially puts in a request that they repaint his Hellcat so that it can be his command and control vehicle, and he's going to do everything from a Hellcat. And obviously, this is Butch O'Hare, the war hero and fighter ace. He's going to get what he wants, and he does just that. Now with Butch O'Hare in charge of over 100 pilots on the USS Enterprise, they go and provide air support to the Marine Corps as they make amphibious landings at Tarawa and Macon Island. And with the help of the new Hellcats, they absolutely crush the Japanese in daytime combat, so bad that the Japanese have to ditch the idea altogether. After the Japanese realize they can no longer go toe-to-toe with the American aviators during daylight, they resort to using night tactics. Basically, the Japanese resort to sending torpedo bombers out in the dark of night, launching torpedoes and hoping they hit American ships. Now, it's not super effective because the torpedo bombers can't really aim. However, it's also effective in that the Americans also can't really send planes up to stop them because night fighting at this point in time isn't really a thing. Okay, you gotta realize this is 1943. Radars are still fairly new technology, and they're mostly being used on ground arrays, and recently they're starting to be used on big naval vessels. They can't cram one of these things inside of a fighter plane yet. So at best, all the Americans can do is use the radar on on the ship to see the enemies coming and then essentially brace for impact. They are not going to be able to scramble their own fighters to go up without a radar.
Sounds like somebody needs to do a deep attack.
Right? Even if the ship tried to tell the planes where the enemy was, like, is that my left or your left? Is that my guy or is that an enemy? They'd end up shooting more of themselves down than they would the enemy. It'd be complete chaos. So that's really all the Americans can do, is just hope they miss. That was until Butch came up with a plan. What if we took the Avenger, it's a big plane, we crammed a radar into that, and then sent the Avenger up with a bunch of Hellcats, and then as long as we could stay in formation, we would be able to tell in relation to ourselves where the enemy was. The Avenger could be like the enemies to the left, the enemies to the right, and everybody has the same left, the same right. The Avenger could guide everybody. Now, obviously, if the entire thing devolves into a giant dogfight, we're going to have a huge issue, but we should be able to ambush them under the cover of night and stay in formation and hopefully not lose it. And we don't need to go chasing kills. We just need to prevent them from launching torpedoes at the ship. We just need to either shoot them down while maintaining our formation, or we just need to scare them off. So Butch gets permission from the chain of command. They shove a radar inside of a Grumman Avenger, and now he starts developing night fighting tactics, and his crew becomes known as the Black.
Oh shit, the Black Sheep.
Avenger, and now he starts developing night fighting tactics, and his crew becomes known as the Black Panthers. So November...
The Black Panthers, I was mistaken. Hey. This would become an unfortunate name in the future. Oof. Still, not taken away from that. Although, I am curious about something. Okay, so like radar, that, here's, oh no, I fully appreciate that he basically invented AWACS. But here's my question, is the radar back then, you could get some general, you can get positioning via radar on a two-dimensional level. How the hell do you compensate for three-dimensional dynamics on the old World War II radar systems? Because did the old World War II radar systems it was good enough to indicate altitudes? Okay, that's what I was wondering. Like, did the radar in its first inception during this time during World War II was it able to account for altitude changes? And if it can, okay, that answers my question. Because I'm thinking like, okay, two-dimensional, positioning. Like, I'm trying to remember, like, because they didn't have like digitized screens like we see now, where we'll have a little indicator on each on radar ping to indicate, altitude and positioning like that. It's the OG one, but this radar was able to account for that. Okay.
November 1943, they go up for their first night mission, attempting to intercept Japanese bombers.
And by the way, chat, the Black Panthers thing, I'm not talking about the comic book. I'm talking about the radical group that came about in like the 60s, 1970s. I'm not referring to the Marvel comic book when I was saying that's unfortunate.
Panthers. So in November 1943, they go up for their first night mission, attempting to intercept Japanese bombers. They were unable to find the Japanese bombers at night. However, they didn't get to shoot off their torpedoes, and they got all the planes back on the carrier under the cover of night. So it was deemed a pretty big success. Then November 27th, 1943, they go up for their second night mission. There's 2 Avengers and 4 Hellcats divided into 2 different groups, and they are going to go up there and stop the Japanese bombers. By the time all the American planes get up in the air, the Japanese bombers are so close that the Avengers are having trouble differentiating the radar signatures between the Japanese bombers and the American Hellcats. And before Butch and his wingman can actually find their Avenger and get into formation, Butch's Avenger actually runs into the Japanese bombers first and opens fire. Even though it's not a fighter, it does have some guns, but it's not a lot. Regardless, they're able to shoot down one of the Japanese bombers. And then Butch's Avenger again somehow runs into another Japanese bomber before finding Butch and the wingman, and it shoots that one down too. At this point, it's chaos. There's multiple planes in the air, American and Japanese, and they're in close proximity and they don't know who is who. So Butch instructs his wingman and the Avenger to both turn on their cabin lights at the same time so all 3 of them can see each other for a brief moment and be able to get into formation. So they turn the cab lights on for a brief second, they all see each other, then they turn them back off right away. At this point, the crew of the Avenger spots
Oh, that reminds me of, oh, what was it? Big. Oh, God, what was that movie? Shit. I can't remember. And by the way, Hero Bride, thank you for the follow. It's, oh God, what was that? Courage Under Fire. That's what it was. This reminds me of that scene in Courage Under Fire when Denzel Washington is a tank commander. They're at night. They can't see shit. They're running over mines. They're engaging in accidental friendly fire because they can't actually differentiate between their own tanks and enemy tanks. And Denzel commands all of the tanks engage your headlights. And all of the friendly tanks engage headlights. His spotter eyeballs a tank, and Denzel says, "Lights or no lights?" And he says, "No lights," and they go, "Send it." And they take it out and send me like T-69 or something. That's what that reminds me of, that very scene from Courage Under Fire.
A Japanese bomber above Butch, approaching him from the rear, most likely attempting to shoot him down. They radio to Butch that he has somebody on his tail, and they radio to the other Hellcat to send them forward to take out the bomber. Butch's wingman in the Hellcat speeds up, intercepts the bomber, opens fire, and the bomber opens fire on Butch. The bomber takes heavy damage and veers off into the darkness, at which point the crew in the Avenger radios, "Butch, we got him. Butch, we got him. Come in.
Oh,
over."
no.
And there's nothing. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it is believed that the bombing crew got a lucky shot off that pierced Butch's canopy, killing him directly without heavily damaging his plane. It is the only thing that would explain why he didn't radio that he had been hit. Despite extraordinary efforts, his remains were never recovered, and he was declared dead 1 year later. In addition to Butch O'Hare, 6 more American pilots would give their lives conducting carrier-based night operations during World War II, utilizing the techniques that Butch O'Hare had helped develop. Those missions are credited with downing 103 Japanese planes that otherwise would have been able to attack defenseless American ships. Butch not only saved lives through his direct actions in combat, but through his expert training of the next generation of naval aviators in World War II, and his help developing groundbreaking techniques like the thatch weave and carrier-based night combat. In conclusion, this is why the airport in Chicago is known as O'Hare International Airport. It's named after a famous...
Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Wow. I was wondering about that. I was wondering if that was it. Oh, God. Yeah, he did. He did. Oh, what's that? Oh, 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 God. I'm okay. I'm okay. Oh, oh, Flark. I did, David. I did. Oh, God. I never knew. I never knew. All the years I grew up there, I never knew. But this is what was making me to the airport. I never knew. I can't feel so bad about that. I feel so bad that I never knew this about O'Hare. Yeah. Oh, God. No. At least now I have some new information I can tell my family. So if I learned something. Oh. Well, yeah, I can tell my family about this now the next time I talk to him. Then, yeah. Oh, he did. He did doing the job that he wanted to do. And he did the job that no one else could. No, Granos, I'm from Chicago. That's where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in Chicago. I've flown out of O'Hare so many fucking times, and I never knew that that's where it derived its name from. Oh, oh wow, it's amazing. Okay, oh god, okay.
Conclusion, this is why the airport in Chicago is known as O'Hare International Airport. It's named after a famous man named Edward O'Hare. And no, not the famous mafia lawyer that had ties to Al Capone and was famously assassinated, but rather his son, the man that overcame the sins of his father to become one of the greatest war heroes in American history. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Whack bang, out.
Lieutenant O'Hare, tell us about what happened in the Pacific that February afternoon.
We were out there and we ran into a bunch of these Jap bombers. We think we did pretty good with them.
Are you thinking of yourself or hitting the other fellow?
Well, you don't have much time to think about yourself. The main thing you worry about is whether you can stop them before they get to your ship, because if you don't, why, you won't have any place to go when you do finish up.
Man was an absolute hero. An absolute hero. Oh, oh God. Oh God. Oh, 7. Oh, 7 Butch. No. 8. Oh, 7 Butch.